Hello, Allyane here. I apologize for the delay on this video because it is a very dense topic, but it is finally here. So let us talk gear, how to get it, as well as cubes and skill decisions. So gear, how do you obtain it? Well, you obtain some pieces of gear from the campaign, clearing certain nodes, but mainly your source of gear will be from Special Interception. Special Interception goes from level D all the way to level EX. There are 3 levels, D, S, and EX. Level D will give you gear that will range from tier 4 all the way to tier 5, if you manage to complete the maximum rewards. Otherwise, you will start at tier 1 gear from stage 1. Level S will give you rewards that will range from that tier 5 all the way to tier 7 manufacturer gear. And finally, level EX, the most important one, which is the highest level of Special Interception, will yield you gear that will range from tier 8 all the way to tier 9 manufacturer gear. And this will also yield you, if you manage to fully clear an EX stage, what we call the Rockas, also called custom modules, which will allow you to upgrade tier 9 manufacturer gear into tier 10 through the process that we call overloading. Now, overloading, how it works is that you need a piece of manufacturer gear, tier 9 level manufacturer gear to be precise, and then you need to level it up to level 5 by feeding it fodder. It can be the little chips, or it can be other pieces of gear. Preferably, don't feed tier 9 manufacturer gear because you're going to need that a lot. And then once it is at level 5, you will use one of the rocks, also called custom modules again, which will then turn it into a piece of overload gear. Do keep in mind that once you overload a piece of equipment on a Nikke, it is tied forever to that Nikke. Once you overload that piece of equipment, it will gain additional stats, hence the value of locking a overload to a Nikke permanently. Even though it's a massive downside, it will give additional stats to the Nikke that are not counted into the combat power, and that are very, very potent. Overload will increase combat power, but the lines themselves don't really change the power itself. So, the probability for each of the 3 slots per overload gear are: slot 1, you will always have one, that's 100%. Slot 2, you have a 50% chance of having an additional line there, and slot 3, you have a 30% chance of having an additional line. It is possible to have 3 full lines. The probability for the values, or rather for the type of lines, is 12% for hit rate, ammo capacity, charge damage, charge speed, and crit rate, while all of the other ones are at a 10% probability. Now, each individual probability, you can check it in the additional information when you're about to overload. Generally, it's 1.2% for phase 1, and at the lowest, phase 15, at 0.1% across the 10% probability. If you go for the 12% probability, it's 1.44 for phase 1, all the way through phase 5, same for the other one when it was 1.2, and then at the lowest 0.12% for the final phases across phase 11 all the way to phase 15. Now, as you can tell, it is kind of difficult to have a very specific line on the final row, hence why third lines are so valuable when they're good stats for Nikkes, and why a lot of people lock them. We'll talk about locking later, but do keep in mind third lines are quite valuable, especially if it's a good stat for the Nikke. Now, the lines themselves, as I broke them down, are elemental, attack, ammunition, charge speed, charge damage, hit rate, crit damage, and defense. That's a lot of stats, but how do we know what to aim for? Well, we need to understand first how the damage formula works, and what Nikke as a game values. Nikke is a game that values damage quite significantly because all stages are on a time limit. Meaning that to some extent, every stage is in a way a DPS check, because you cannot stay there forever. And doing more damage, hence clearing faster, is generally more rewarded. How the damage formula works is that you have the final damage, that is base damage times the major multipliers, times elemental damage times charge damage, times damage up times damage taken debuffs. That's a lot of things to take. You don't need to memorize it. We will have a video on theory crafting later. What you need to keep in mind is the two of the multipliers in the damage formula, which are base damage, which is the character's base attack that multiplied by the attack buff sum, basically all of the buffs of attack minus enemy defense times final attack damage. And also major modifiers, because it's 1 plus crit damage plus core hit and then plus range bonus plus full burst bonus. What all of this means, because it's a lot of information to take in one go, is that crit damage, and by extension crit rate because it's directly tied to crit damage, aren't as amazing in Nikke as they would be, for example, in Star Rail or Genshin Impact, where you always aim for crit rate, crit damage on a lot of characters. This is due to the formula having those values being diluted inside of the major modifiers along with core damage and other values, while attack and elemental are essentially direct multipliers to the final damage. Charge speed and charge damage aren't that amazing, and especially charge speed is very situational and the values tend to be low, so what you have to keep in mind when choosing is that universally, elemental damage, I cannot think of a single Nikke that does not want elemental damage. Attack is universally good with very few exceptions. As we talked in the previous video, not all classes are made equal. Attackers have the highest attack, while defenders have the lowest base attack. Overload lines are applied when it comes to attack based on their base attack. So if you have a low base attack, you will have less benefit from using attack. Which leads to some very specific Nikkes that, as a result, do not want attack because of how their kit function. 2B is a very good example of that. She provides herself very hefty attack buffs through her own HP to attack conversion, and she's a defender, so attack overload lines are not all that beneficial. However, her ultimate can crit, which means that on her you would want actually elemental, crit damage, and crit rate. Now, ammunition, as I said, is generally a very good line to have because it allows you to just shoot and reload less. There are, however, what we call final bullet Nikkes, as mentioned in previous videos, that will be significantly worse if you give them ammunition. Dorothy is one of such examples. As well, there exist Nikkes that do not benefit from additional lines of ammunition, not because they have final bullet mechanics, but because they refund a lot of their own ammunition, so they don't really benefit from being able to have more ammo, as they just straight up don't need it. They reload very little. Scarlet Black Shadow and Christmas Ludmilla are one of such examples, and another example as well is Nikkes that spike in damage during their burst and do not so much damage outside of their burst. And during their burst, they essentially have infinite ammunition while shooting. In this case, I am thinking of Red Hood. And as a result, because they hit very hard during that burst, they would go for different substats, or they would go straight up for different substats for off-burst, because they do not need that ammunition. Hit rate is a stat that is very nice to splash to shotgun Nikkes, especially ones that rely on their own attacks for main damage, because it reduces the spread of the bullets. You can see the spread based on the light black circle on the weapon when you're shooting, near the reticle when you're aiming at. It is not all that useful outside of shotguns and maybe some very fringe machine gun cases. And especially for machine guns, if you can keep them for full spin all the time, it's not really that big of an issue. When it comes to AR Nikkes, for example, I have spoken with some people in Omni. Additional hit rate lines for things like Scarlet make barely any difference, so it is mostly beneficial for shotgun Nikkes. Locking and re-rolling is a very important facet of doing your gear and optimizing it. This is once you have overloaded, you have the option to actually re-roll the values if you got bad values, so that you're not permanently braked because, for example, you got max ammunition on Dorothy. When you reroll, you have two choices. You can reroll the entire values, or you can change the values. Changing the values means that you are just changing the numbers, not the stat types, and rerolling is changing the entire thing, as if you were overloading all over again. If you don't want to lose a specific stat, so for example, I was mentioning how valuable a good line on the third line is for overload gear, you can lock it. Now, locking costs 2 rocks for the first lock, and the second lock will cost 3 rocks. Now, once a line is locked, on the first line locked, every reroll will cost 2 rocks instead of 1. And if you have 2 locked lines, it will cost you 3 rocks instead of 1 if you had no locked lines. Do keep in mind as well that unlocking is free, so that is at least a bright side to all of this. Now, breakpoints are something that are not discussed often enough. Sky has talked about it many months ago, and this is something that I have talked with Contosis. Different values of lines or same value lines when it comes to overload are not applied the same way. Nikke, you have to keep in mind, it rounds to the nearest whole number. This is very important because when combined with the fact that overload lines are not applied equally and there is also rounding involved, you have what we call breakpoints. So, the breakpoints, I will give you an example. Alice starts at 6 ammunition as a sniper rifle, and let's imagine you have 4 overload lines, 2 77% and 1 63% and 1 60% as her ammunition overload lines. Same type of line values are summed together and then applied to your base ammunition. In this case, you would have 77% plus 77%, so you would have 154% applied to your base ammunition. This means that you would have from that 6 ammunition, 9.24 ammunition, which will in turn become 9 ammunition. The 73% and the 60% will be applied individually to the base ammo, meaning that 73% will become 4.38 ammunition rounded down to 4, and that 60% ammunition will be 3.6 extra ammunition rounded up to 4 ammunition, meaning that between the 73% and the 60% line in ammunition value for sniper rifles, or for rocket launchers, for example, there is no difference between 73% and 60% due to rounding. So what is interesting as well is that for the 77%, instead of having 4.6 times 2, which would then be rounded up each individual one up to 5, and then you would gain 10, they get added together and then applied to the base ammo as mentioned, meaning that you get 9.24 rounded down to 9. Meaning that instead of getting 10 additional ammo, you actually get 9 in this case. And these breakpoints are things that you need to keep in mind when you want to decide to reroll, because once you are at certain ammunition lines, for example, when it comes to sniper rifles and rocket launchers, the chances of getting something big enough to go into the next breakpoint might not be as easy as it seems, and it might just not be worthwhile to reroll your ammunition on those specific scenarios. There are other additional breakpoints as well for things like charge speed when it comes to Alice, but we will talk that in a future video. These are not so much of an issue, or at least less of an issue when it comes to things like machine guns who have hundreds of ammunition, but it is something to keep in mind nonetheless when doing overload gear. Now, let us talk cubes. Cubes are an additional piece of equipment that you can acquire from lost sectors. Lost sectors unlock as you progress through the main campaign, and these lost sectors are a type of puzzles and combat stage, in which at the end you will have gem rewards, tickets, and cubes. Cubes are very important because these are pieces of equipment that not only increase your combat power, but also give you additional bonuses. So the cubes currently, as of the making of this video, are Resilience, Bastion, Assault, Onslaught, Adjutant, Wingman, Quantum, Vigor Cube, as well as the Endurance Cube. The effects are as follows. Resilience gives reload speed. Bastion refunds ammunition for every 10 bullets spent, at a maximum of 3 bullets refunded for every 10 ammunition spent. Do keep in mind that this does not mean that it refunds 30%, this means that it refunds 42.86% due to how the math works. Assault Cube increases the hit rate, Onslaught increases charge damage, Adjutant increases charge speed, Wingman increases the ammo capacity, Quantum increases burst generation, Vigor increases maximum HP, and Endurance increases defense. Now, you might be wondering, how do I level them up and what is the priority for cubes? So, to level them up, you need batteries. Batteries can be obtained either in lost sectors, as solo raid rewards for clearing the daily reward for the level 1s and not the challenge one, as well as things that you can purchase with Union Raid currency in the Union Raid shop tab. The priority when it comes to leveling these cubes is, for the most part, Resilience and then Bastion. And if you care about PvP, afterwards you can level up the Quantum Cube. And after that, it depends on your priorities and what Nikkes you use. You could level up all the other cubes, but it's not super necessary for the most part. The important ones are really Resilience and Bastion, and then Quantum for PvP. Something to keep in mind as well is that the best level ranges to level up the cubes, so that it's not too expensive, is anywhere between level 7 and 8. Level 7 is when the final bonus of the main bonus, rather, is given. So, for example, the maximum bonus for Bastion would be at level 7 of 3 bullets refunded every 10 bullets spent. Level 8 would give an additional slot to equip for equipping it on your Nikkes, so that you can equip it on more Nikkes at a time. Personally, I like having the main cubes at level 8 because it's very comfortable and very flexible, on top of giving the bonuses. Anything beyond that will give additional slots and will give a little bit of additional elemental damage. But my personal recommendation is level them to level 7 and then passively level them up through subsequent solo raids. So let us talk about skills. How do I, for example, pick skills to level up and what priority to recommend to the people that I give account reviews to? So what I look into first is what is useful. What is realistically useful as a skill when it comes to fighting? So I look at support skills, what will increase the damage, or damaging skills as well, what will allow the Nikke to do more damage, or what will allow the Nikke to heal more, or survive more easily. After that, I look at the scaling. The scaling per level is something to keep an eye out on, because some skills may look very juicy, and then you realize that their scaling is not so good, and each level actually doesn't give that much. So you can use websites such as Nikke.gg or Loots and Waifus to see the values at level 10, or you can just go at the Nikkepedia and look at the values at level 10. And before leveling a skill, you can press on it and see by how much of a percentage each one increases. When I talk about usefulness in actual application, there is a few things to keep in mind. Shields, if they don't increase by quite a lot, are generally not a very high priority for me, because shields, when overkilled, will still soak the damage. You don't really need to level up that much. Now, once I have looked at the usefulness of the skills and their scaling, I also look at what breakpoints they have. So for example, Leona S2, I will use it as an example, has a breakpoint at level 7 on her S2 for the maximum number of pellets. Anything beyond that will not increase the number of pellets anymore, so if I am leveling it up for the sake of the pellets, I don't need to go beyond that. Scarlet Black Shadow is one of the greatest examples of this, as anything past level 7 on the skill 2 is, for the most part, not very useful. You already have hit reloading 100% of the magazine on every burst, and the increase on ammo capacity is very marginal at this point. She can hit almost infinite on her own if you put something like a Bastion cube on her and 1 line of ammunition. These are things that either you can figure out or you can be on the lookout for guides on other people. But if you want to figure it out yourself, of course, you have to look at these things. So that will be it for the gear guide and overload guide, as well as cubes and some basics on how to skill invest. The next video will be about managing your resources, which is very important. I will talk about what is worthwhile in terms of value to buy in the shop if you're a spender, as well as some general guidelines for free-to-plays, as well as how to use your wish list when it comes to using blue tickets, gem management, boxes, how they work, how to manage a little bit your fodder, the importance of friend points, bond tickets, and how it is important to buy certain things from events when it comes to farming resources and the like.